Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about Succession Season 3, Episode 7, Too Much Birthday. And this is indeed the party to end all parties for Ken. Watching him at the start of the episode and at the end was very interesting because his facade is broken. And now he has come to the realization that his family knows that he has nothing over them. And I also really enjoyed Roman and Shiv. It's a man's world and Shiv is just living in it. The last few episodes, they've been emphasizing Roman's sort of mommy issues, his sort of inferiority complex. And I think for Logan, after dealing with Ken, Roman is the best of both worlds, where he will always be his puppet, right? He doesn't have the strength to go it alone like Ken does. So although he might not have the instincts that Ken does in terms of moving the company forward, at least he'll always fall back. So the episode starts off with this grim sort of rehearsal that Ken is doing for his birthday party. And he has this whole like singing thing and he wants to be laid on a cross. Like the whole thing is so cringe and nobody around him is telling him that it's cringe. Like he's essentially surrounded by yes people. And I thought it was interesting that not even his girlfriend, who seems like a savage, like she didn't even really tell him. And I think it speaks to how we have like this sick fascination with watching people kind of burn themselves or hang themselves. Like Ken's rehearsal was so cringe that it's one of those things where you kind of want to see if he'll do it. It kind of reminds me when he was rapping, right? Like nobody told this guy like this was a bad idea. So this is kind of at the start of the episode. He's optimistic, he's happy, he feels like he's kicking ass. And he's gonna plan the wokest party of them all. Okay, so before we get to this party, we'll just look at Team Logan. So we find Shiv, Roman, and Tom kind of preparing for this meeting. And I love how Tom was looking at pictures of prison, like he doesn't care. He really doesn't care. And so Shiv and Roman were kind of preparing for this meeting with a company that, if I recall, like it was Ken's idea. And so they're kind of deciding how to pitch it, and there's kind of disagreements. And, you know, I think Roman says something interesting, right? It's the small details that make up the bigger picture. And this is relevant as we get towards the end of the episode because there's so many things that Shiv is not seeing. Like, although she's in charge by title, she has no power. But before they get to this meeting, they kind of walk in and, you know, everybody's having champagne. And it seems like no one is going to jail. So Jerry kind of informs us that all the theatrics they've been doing in terms of cooperation, doing trainings, and, you know, making it look like they've kind of changed their whole like company, their whole company has worked. And it seems like they now know that the papers that Ken was kind of holding over them lack the sort of explosiveness that they feared that it would. And so the only repercussions will be a fine. And at watching everybody's reaction was hilarious. So first, Shiv's reaction was, she's horrified. She does not seem excited at all. She kind of rolls her eyes. She kind of makes this comment like, let's hope you don't do it again. You know, really snide comments. And I do think there was some part of Shiv that hoped that, you know, the boys would kind of kill each other and she would be the only person left standing. Again, Shiv likes to be handed things. She doesn't really work for them. And you see that at the party. And then Tom's reaction is relief. He's excited. He goes over to Greg. He flips his table. And this whole meeting with Greg I thought was interesting because he kisses him. And I couldn't tell if this was like the kiss of death, you know? So Tom is excited and he's relieved. He dodged a bullet. And, you know, now this company has the sort of added task of restoring their image. So although they're fine, nobody else knows that they're fine, right? Like as far as everyone else is concerned from the outside looking in, this company is a bit of a disaster, and you see that with this meeting. So they've been preparing to buy this other company, and just before this meeting, it turns out the CEO of this Gojo, he just refused to show up. Like he's not there, they don't know where he is, and this is a bad sign, right? And Logan is pretty annoyed, right? He's pretty pissed off that this guy doesn't have the audacity to come. He thinks it's a bad omen. You know, here they are celebrating this victory. They finally saw what's behind the curtain when it comes to Ken. And meanwhile, you know, they still have to salvage their own image. And Logan starts throwing all these sort of empty threats like, oh yeah, maybe we should go back to Pierce. And I love the background commentary, you know, like, oh, that's so exciting. Like people trying to agree with him. But I will say this about Logan, he at least acknowledged that the deal was good. but he didn't want to look like he was chasing after somebody. You know, he didn't want to overpay. He didn't want them to look desperate, especially coming off this win, right? He wants that momentum. And so I thought it was interesting watching Shiv and Roman like fight really hard for this, because for a while they were a team. Like Shiv is really pushing. She's like, we need this. We have no signs of growth. We're basically, you know, we're draconian. There's nothing interesting about us. You know, this will restart our sort of life. And even Roman was like, listen, this might not be easy. You know, I know you don't want to do it, but this guy wants to be courted. And again, Logan kind of is always in a position where people are courting him. And we saw that in the last episode. So the idea that he has to convince somebody to do what he says is just horrifying for him. And I thought it was really interesting what Shiv said, because at one point the assistant made a comment about the CEO saying he was like a one-off dude. He created one thing and his ego is gigantic. And Shiv says, well, F him is not a strategy. And Logan was like, actually it is. And watching Logan, Roman, and Shiv, like Shiv is totally on the outside, and there's so many few sort of signs where she's just not getting it. And one of them is with Logan and this assistant. So at one point, Roman and Shiv have a conversation about the assistant, and she kind of, again, Shiv is under the impression that her father's having a midlife crisis and he's not seeing things clearly. And you can see that with her tone of voice. Whereas Roman is like, nah, he's just powerful. Like he's just an asshole. Like that. There's like everything he's doing is actually normal. You wouldn't know that because you are a woman. And so I think Shiv's sort of confidence and thinking that she can kind of talk her dad into things is a little misguided. So Logan agrees to let his kids kind of work for him. So he's not going to chase after this guy, but he's like, okay, you guys sort yourselves out, but I'm not going to overpay, so do what you can. And at the beginning, they're supposed to work as a team, but it's clear even before they get to this meeting, they're not a team. So as they're leaving the room, Logan kind of gives Roman a piece of paper or like an envelope. And it's clear that Roman knows what's in the envelope because he's like, oh yeah, this. Like he's very aware of what's inside, but Shiv is not aware. So they've had discussions on their own. They've been strategizing by themselves, and Shiv is not a part of it. So this was like a huge sort of red flag. So we get to Ken's party and the hunt for Lukas. So there's two things going on at this party. First is Ken's sort of wokeness, and the other is like this sort of competition to see who can convince this CEO, this Lukas guy, you know, to kind of take their deal. And I actually really enjoyed Ken's party. The visuals were fantastic from beginning to end, right? Like they kind of walk in and, you know, they're birthing like some, you know, kind of birthing Ken's demise, like walking in through the, you know, the private part. Even when Ken is opening the letter, like if you notice the room that he's opening the letter in, or the card, it's like the visuals behind him, it's like burned. It's like a fire background, kind of indicating that he'd been burned. I also really enjoyed the compliment sort of tunnel that Greg and Ken were going in. The pictures of Ken everywhere, like he's sort of a president or something, like the narcissism for me. Like he tried so hard to come up with a party that, you know, isn't an asshole party, but it's so pretentious, it's so ridiculous. Like, again, like if you watch the visuals, it speaks for itself. Okay, so they walk into Ken's nightmare, and automatically, like Roman is totally triggered by everything, and he has mother issues. Like anytime the issue of his mother comes up or something related to family, in terms of his parents, like he just gets triggered. Like he just gets so annoyed, and you know, he was making all these comments, but you could tell like things were getting under his skin. In terms of Tom, he's just chilling. Right, he's so relieved, and it's really sad because Tom's relief is not felt by anyone. He's the only one that kind of feels the weight off of him. And the other person feeling pretty confident is Greg, right? So Greg is not going to jail. Tom is not going to jail. And Greg throughout this episode is like, you know what, I'm going to ask this girl out because she's super cute. And it's really interesting with Greg because he's really starting to hate Ken. Like I've noticed in the last few episodes, his sort of annoyance with Ken is really increasing, right? And so he wants to ask this assistant out. And we find out also that Ken is not great to work with. He's very he expects everyone to kind of adjust as need be. Apparently he changes his mind often. Like he's a bit annoying to deal with. And how that's going to manifest itself with Greg, I'm not really sure. Connor is really interesting because apparently he has some support. And you know, Connor is like kind of like, he has these con heads, which I guess are supposed to mirror like Trumpsters, where, you know, at first you don't think he can do it, and then later he surprises everyone. So Connor is kind of having this weird underdog moment where at first we're thinking there's no way this guy is going to do anything, but you never know. And a sign where things are becoming more serious for him is that even his girlfriend, or his sugar baby, is taking him seriously, right? She kind of defends him throughout the whole episode, and we've never seen that from her. Like, normally she's rolling her eyes, or she seems like she's just being paid to be there, but this episode she was kind of defending his ass. Okay, so Ken and his siblings are reunited, and watching them kind of like banter back and forth was really enjoyable. There's a lot of great lines in this episode that kind of come at you pretty fast, and so they kind of give him this fake hug, and they kind of comment on the fact that like, everyone here is not here for you, Ken, despite your delusions, right? Like, this is a business meeting, and we're all here to basically poach whoever we can from you. And so Ken at first doesn't really take it too seriously, and just before he shows them like his artwork, Roman kind of slips him the card, right? And at first you could tell like Ken is feeling pretty nice. He gets a card from his father. I think he genuinely thought something nice was in there. And then we get to this sort of like horror show of like artwork on the wall, and I don't know if this is foreshadowing the end of the season, but it was really funny, and it was pretty accurate, right? And I love how savage this family is to one another. Like, one minute they're fighting, the next minute they're like at each other's party. I mean, they're all unstable as hell. And so Ken kind of goes off by himself to see what's in this card, and he opens it, and the room he opens it in is like, the background has flames, right? Indicating that he's about to get burned. And he opens the card, it says cash out and get out, basically. And not only does it tell him to cash out, it tells him the steps needed for him to take his money and go. And when he kind of sees this, he kind of comes to the realization that his family now knows that he has nothing. Like, the papers that he's been kind of dangling over them, it's over. It no longer has power, and he doesn't have the appearance of having power. Like, the only kind of advantage he had is the fact that his family maybe thought he was a threat to them. But now that they no longer see him this way, it's over, right? So this kind of is the beginning of his unraveling, I feel like. Something in his mind started turning, and he starts waking up a bit. He has a conversation with his girlfriend Naomi, and he's like, you know, maybe like, you know, tells her about the offer. And in total, if he were to cash out, he would get $2 billion, which is more than enough to start a company, I feel. And even his girlfriend was like, yeah, maybe you should take the cash, to be honest. Like, and the thing about Ken is his whole life, he has such a chip on his shoulder. Like, it's not about the money for him. I think it's about the win. Like, it's about the, you know, like, he really feels like he's entitled to this position. And the idea of walking away from it for money is just not something that I don't think ever really occurred to him. And so he's still in that weird mindset where he's competitive. Like, he still separates his father from the company, right? But as the episode goes on, he's starting to kind of see them as one of the same. And the first indication of that is this meeting with Lukas. So throughout the episode, there's like a competition to see who can get to this Lukas guy. And just before Ken has a conversation with him, he kind of blocks him in this treehouse of horrors. And this whole treehouse situation, like, the lines that were coming out of it, like, anybody with a treehouse should be on a sex offenders registry. Like, the whole back and forth between the two, like, welcome to his mental disorder. Like, the savagery back and forth. I think at one point Ken said, like, y'all are like Nazi lovers or something like this, and he keeps blocking them. So again, the dialogue this episode, like, if you found the episode kind of boring, just rewatch it because it was really funny. And so Ken blocks them. He's like, no, you're not going to talk to this man. You can't come to my treehouse. Get your raggedy behinds out of here. So the most significant thing that came out of this back and forth is the fact that Shiv found out about the letter, right? She found out that Roman and Logan made an offer to Ken to sort of buy him out, and she didn't know. And this begins her unraveling. And Shiv was very weak this episode. Like, rather than kind of focus and try and do her best, she just kind of says, like, she just stops caring. Whereas Roman is like a savage dog throughout this episode, like any means necessary. Like one way or another, he's gonna talk to this man and he's gonna get him to do what he wants, but not before Ken talks to him. So this whole sort of conversation with Ken and Lukas I thought was interesting because I think the two complement each other nicely. I also like the addition of Lukas because I couldn't read him at all. I couldn't tell if he was messing with all of them. He was so sarcastic. He was so like, all his answers were just so, I don't know, like he was just saying things to say things, and it was hard to know what exactly he was looking for. And I thought this was the first time we've seen Ken not really defend the company. So Ken comes in and he says, hey, like, what's up? You know, and they keep throwing all these references at him, like these sort of coding, VPN, like these kind of really annoying little things. It's like, okay, we get it. He's very good at his job. Y'all need to chill. And Ken says something interesting, like, why would you let Amtrak buy Tesla, essentially? Like, why would you go to business with my father? Why don't you just buy him? And that's not something we've seen from Ken before. Like, normally it's the other way around, where he's like, listen, this is the best option. And normally Ken is in a position where he's defending the company in that sort of like, I'm going to take over soon. So, you know, just bear with me. But this time he was like, nah, man, like, you got enough power, do your own thing. And then he kind of leaves him with his drug dealer and he goes off. And I think Lukas, like, he kind of looked at him like surprised. And I couldn't tell if he was impressed by Ken or disgusted by Ken. Again, like, this was a good addition. And I feel like all the characters that they add, although they don't get a lot of screen time, they add to character development. And I appreciate that the show never gets distracted by these sort of additional people. Like, every character that they've added adds to our main character's development. They don't distract from it. And I feel this Lukas did a good job of adding to Ken's sort of character development. And Ken is in his own world. Like, he's not really focused. He doesn't talk to him too much, and he just kind of goes off. And then he finds his ex-wife. This conversation with his ex-wife, like, nails his coffin. This was the bit where he was done, I think. Like, mentally, he just starts to unravel. So they're having a conversation about the birthday party, how grotesque the whole thing is, how lame it is, and how, like, you know, and he's kind of annoyed because she's seeing somebody else, I think. And at one point she kind of mentions the fact that their children had been harassed, and he was like, excuse me? And on top of that, she also mentions this birthday present, like, did you get your children's gifts? And he's like, no, I didn't. And he was kind of like shook because his children never occurred to him. Like, did he even invite his children? Like, this party is not kid friendly, right? So as he's kind of listening to his ex-wife speak, something in his mind kind of clicked, like some type of bigger picture, I think, that he wasn't thinking about before. And then he just starts trying to talk himself back into his delusion. So as soon as he talks to his ex-wife, he starts kind of like taking his anger out on everybody else, right? Like, his whole thing is, this is an asshole party. The reason, Ken, this is an asshole party is because you're an asshole, you know? And he keeps trying to outsource blame throughout, like, oh, you guys, you didn't make sure that this was perfect. He blames, like, Connor's jacket at one point, like, why isn't this guy taking off his jacket? He then takes his anger out on Greg. And a lot of the stuff he said to Greg was really unnecessary because I think he was angry that now everyone could see behind the curtain, and everyone knows that his papers are nothing. And so a lot of his frustration, I think he just kind of took out on Greg. He called him a snitch, you know, he called him like everything, a parasite, the world's biggest parasite. He called him, what else did he say? He said something really interesting. Why don't you stop sucking off your family, essentially? Like, why don't you go, you know, like, screw over other people? And although Ken's descriptions were accurate, they were so mean-spirited, right? Like, Greg was kind of coming to him like, can I ask out your assistant? And Ken is like, get the hell away from me. And Greg's reaction is really interesting because Greg, again, he's increasingly getting very annoyed with Ken. And his response was to go ask out this assistant anyways. He asks her out. Turns out this assistant of his is also annoyed with him, like he's a terrible person to work for. And so how this is all going to manifest itself, I'm not sure, but Greg was pissed, and so was Ken. And I think the reason that Ken is also very angry is not just because his family kind of sees through his lies, is because he's not getting credit for anything. Like, his father has everyone working for his best interest, right? Like, Ken is working for his best interest, whether or not he wants to acknowledge it. Greg, like, he's kind of letting everybody sort themselves out and kind of get rid of each other. And Ken kind of sees this, but he doesn't know how to stop it, right? And the only person who's going to get credit is Roman. And so this conversation between Roman and Lukas is really interesting because I couldn't tell, again, like with Lukas, I really couldn't tell if they were hitting it off, if he was messing with them. But either this meeting went very well or very badly. So as soon as he sits down, you know, Roman kind of weasels his way in. Again, I was very impressed by how Roman was able to force his way in, like any means necessary. Like that's the kind of attitude you need to have, like that can-do attitude. So he sits down, they make this joke about VPN, and again, they keep like emphasizing how smart he is. And this Lukas guy was like, so when's your father gonna die? Is it 5 years or 1 year? I don't really want this guy hanging over me. Like the stuff he was saying was so like, I felt like he was trolling at times. Like Lukas is a troll. Like, I think he just enjoys messing with people, and he's kind of looking at this company as like, I don't know, like, is there anything here for me? I can't tell if he was taking these people seriously or not, but whatever it was, he was really messing with them, and Roman was really bothered, you know, like, but he was playing along. And I think increasingly Roman is taking himself very seriously, and the company very seriously, and his father very seriously. Like, he's taking everything so, before he would kind of mess around and joke, but the more that this Lukas guy said about his father, the more he was like, excuse me, sir? And then they have a conversation about these applications. So apparently Waystar has this application, Stargo, and it's really bad. And Lukas kind of made a comment, like, sometimes I open your app just to see how long it takes to start. And Roman plays along, he's like, yeah, you're right, like, it's really bad. And he's like, you know what, maybe we should pee on it. And this whole thing about pissing on the app, I don't know, it either really undermined Roman's authority, or it kind of like, you know, made Lukas respect him. But something tells me it'll work against them, because at this point, Roman has basically admitted that his company has no backup plan, that they need Lukas to move forward. And in kind of letting him piss on the app, I think Lukas basically established that they need him more than he needs them. And so again, I don't know how well that worked out, but it was a bit of a disaster. And Lukas was like, listen, you can tell your father I'm in conversation. So Roman basically says, listen, you never have to deal with my dad. I'm the middleman. You know, he's kind of making all these promises, and Lukas is looking at him like okay, like I don't know, like I'll say yes for now, but I haven't decided. Okay, so with that being said, Roman kind of takes that as a win. And he's the only person having a great night. You know, he feels very successful. He feels like he's accomplished his goals. And I love this sort of build up to this family blow up. So the first sort of lead up to this was with Ken. So Ken finally comes to the realization that he's BS. He cancels this whole spectacle that he had planned. He acknowledges that it was silly and ridiculous, which is huge for him. And he's tired, right? He spent like a part of the episode looking for his children's gifts. He couldn't find it. You know, he kind of broke down. Nothing was really impressive to him anymore. Even his girlfriend, right? She kind of gifts him with a watch, and he's like, why did you get me this? Like, he's starting to question the people around him. Like, he wants honest answers, and he's starting to realize he's not really getting them. And so this is like, I think, a step forward. You know, like, he's no longer buying into his wokeness, I think. But again, with Ken, he has a funny way of manipulating himself. Second is Shiv. Shiv has totally lost her mind. She's been condescending. As soon as she found out about the offer to Ken, she just kind of loses it. She takes drugs. She's dancing like a maniac. Again, like, doing nothing for her position in the company. And I think the reason she kind of said, like, F it, is because she realizes, like, the futility of it. Like, some part of her knows, like, this is pointless. We get to this family blow up. And this was really something. So Shiv and Roman have a conversation, and Shiv is done. Shiv is like begging Roman for information because she doesn't have any. And Roman is like, you know what, lady, settle down. You know, this is essentially a boys' club. Like, the men have sorted themselves out, and we've decided that, you know what, everything's gonna be okay. And he kind of calls her out. He says, listen, you thought we were going to jail. You really thought, like, you know, something would happen that would pave the way for you, but sis, that ain't happening. And then he takes it a step further. He's like, you also weren't too excited about your husband not going to jail. And that's true. I think Shiv was very disappointed about the news that nobody would be incarcerated. And he said something really horrible. He was like, you couldn't wait to sleep around, right? So the family knows that she has affairs outside of her her marriage. And they also know that she doesn't really respect Tom. And so Roman's whole thing is like, you don't have to respect him, but you're going to have to respect me. And he really goes in on her. And just as they're like blowing up, Ken kind of enters the group chat with his mopey self. And he calls out Roman. He's like, listen, you're not real. Essentially saying you're just a puppet. You know what I mean? Like maybe, you get information and for now, like you're talking with Logan, but he's just using you. And then things just take a turn, right? Like Ken kind of calls them out for the children's sort of harassment. So it seems that people at Waystar were really harassing Ken's children. And what's interesting is Shiv didn't know. So Logan and Roman knew that, Ken's family had been harassed and Shiv was not in on it. And the fact that Shiv is not in on it, I think speaks to kind of how they perceive her, or at least how Logan perceives her, which is weak. Like her sort of boundaries, I don't think her sort of unwillingness to get as dirty as Roman, he kind of sees that as a sign of weakness, right? She's not willing to do anything and everything for her father. Not in the same way that Roman is. And so they're both disgusted, they're both shocked, and everybody kind of goes their separate ways. And this last scene, watching them all separate, was really interesting because the first thing that Roman does is call his father, saying, you know what, everything is great. Again, he's a dog. He's on call, and that's what he does best. Shiv and Tom are not talking to each other anymore. It's almost like, for Shiv, Tom is a non-presence. Like the way she kind of talks to him, it's like he's not, like she forgets that he's there. Like she kind of looks at him like, oh, you're still here. You're not in jail. And Tom is like, he's high out of his mind. And it's funny watching him in front of his wife because, he kind of lectured Greg on the fact that, he had a big, he has big energy. And although Shiv was too good for him, he managed to, he managed to find his way into her heart. And although he kind of gives off that appearance to other people, when you watch them together, it's clear that he's barely surviving in this marriage. And then you see Ken. Ken at the end of the episode is like done. Like his whole vibe is depressed. He has this kind of kid's blanket over him. He's kind of sleeping on, Naomi's sort of, on Naomi's sort of lap, and he's done. And I think it kind of hit him finally that like things are not going to work out. And I don't know how he's going to recover, but it is a good sign, this kind of breaking point of his. And so I don't know what he's going to do. He has 2 episodes to sort himself out. I think this season is building nicely to, an explosive end because there's so much tension that's been kind of building up. And I don't know how this tension is going to explode, but overall, I thought this was an excellent episode. The dialogue, the visuals, everything was on point. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.